Thank you all so much for coming to join us here today. This could have easily been a day of sadness. Looking at the emotional scenes in the European Parliament over the last couple of days, it would have been totally understandable if we were all just at home or at work feeling a bit dejected and defeated. But we're not. We're here together, and we are here with hope and determination to relaunch our campaign to put Scotland's future in Scotland's hands and to put Scotland back at the heart of Europe. And we know that we can win that campaign. We are already winning that campaign, as yesterday's YouGov poll showed. 51% of people in Scotland are ready to vote for independence. Compare that to 2012, at the start of the last campaign, when Yes was struggling to hit 30% in the polls. 1 in 5 of those who voted no in 2014 and who then voted Remain in 2016 already now recognises that the only way to secure Scotland's future as a European nation is with independence. It's those people coming over and joining our campaign, joining our cause, who have put us in the lead already. But if we're being honest, we probably didn't think we were going to be here so quickly. I worked for the Yes campaign last time round. I was really proud of the movement that we all built together, that movement for transformation. And while that movement didn't quite win then, it has paved the way for us to win now. Just as the hard-right extremists in charge of the Tory party are paving the way for independence now. They are pushing people towards independence just as much as we are pulling them towards it. And if you look back then and compare it to where we are now, we are in a radically different position. We are in a far more challenging position as part of the UK as a whole, but our campaign is more inspirational, more transformational, and far more capable of winning than it was at that point. In 2014, we thought we were going to be in it for the long haul. But Brexit and the chaos and the darkness that it unveiled at the heart of the Westminster system has made this choice an urgent one. For European citizens living here in Scotland, the last few years have been horrendous at the hands of the Tories and their allies. We, though, we will not compromise. We will always fight to defend the rights of those who have chosen to make this country their home. There will never be any compromise on our part when it comes to the rights of those who have chosen to be part of our society. And we know that the only way to achieve that is with independence, with the powers to set policies and priorities for Scotland that allow us to realise our ambition to genuinely make this a welcoming and an internationalist nation. For European citizens, this has been a really challenging few years, and we're about to introduce someone who can share their personal reflection on that story. Julia Bandel is someone that some people might recognise from BBC Scotland's debate night, where from the audience she called out every other party for all their warm words on tackling the climate crisis, just weeks after they had voted down a Green motion to actually have the Scottish Parliament declare a climate emergency. Julia's story is one that reflects in many ways that of every one of the 240,000 European citizens who've chosen to come and live here in Scotland. But it also reflects a much wider group of people who've chosen not just to support independence, but to be an active part of the campaign for us to achieve it, an active part of our Green Yes campaign for the kind of progressive and transformational change that we can achieve with independence. So please welcome Julia to share her story with us today.
Hello, I'm Julia. I'm very new to speaking to the public like this, so you'll forgive me if I look at my phone for a bit. But basically, okay, story time. On the morning of the 24th of June 2016, I got one unexpected rejection and I got one very unexpected acceptance. So first, the rejection, I woke up really, really early and I turned on the TV and watched in utter disbelief and shock as the numbers came in and told me that the UK was going to leave the European Union. And then just 4 hours later, I opened my inbox and there was an acceptance letter from the University of Edinburgh. And I was like, oh, okay, so I'm going to Scotland now. And Brexit has been a shadow looming over the entire 3.5 years I've been here so far. And to be honest, at first I thought I was holding out for hope that it wouldn't happen, that we just wouldn't leave, especially after all the extensions. And I say we, and when I wrote this speech and I wrote that down, I really had to stop for a bit and think about how easy it comes to me to think of Scotland as a place that is my home, when the UK government has made it abundantly clear that they think of myself as one of them as opposed to us. For example, last September, I finally applied for settled status, which is what I need to keep my rights after Brexit. And I was hit with a really quite profound sense of not quite belonging, and the terrifying knowledge, I mean, that's really, frankly, quite terrifying, but I'll be completely at the mercy of the Home Office in the future. The same Home Office that saw the Windrush scandal, that was suddenly telling legal immigrants who'd built their lives in the UK they weren't allowed to stay anymore, you know, that Home Office. So I won't have any physical proof of my right to live and work in this country after Brexit. And sometimes it really makes me wonder, will I be able to find a flat in the future? Will I be able to find a job? Or will this become the hostile environment 2.0 European residence edition, making our lives hell until we eventually just give up, pack our bags, and move to the continent? I'm anxious, I'm really, really furious, and worst of all, I know that the UK government doesn't care, because to them, I'm no more than a political bargaining chip. And I think it was this anger and this powerlessness and this just general sense of I'm really fed up with the state of this country and of the planet in general that made me join the Scottish Greens. And you've really given me a chance to have my voice heard, and usually in more figurative ways, but I'm really honored to speak today at this relaunch of Green Yes on what is otherwise a really, really bleak day for all of us. I personally haven't always been pro-independence. In 2013, I went to live in Scotland for a year because freedom of movement is a wonderful thing. And we had a mock vote on Scottish independence at Assembly. And 16-year-old me didn't know much about Scottish politics. I'm very afraid to say that she didn't even know the Scottish Greens existed. But she was very concerned about what Scottish independence would mean for its EU membership. And so in Balfron High School's 2014 Assembly referendum on Scottish independence, 16-year-old me voted no. I changed my opinion as soon as it was clear that the UK was going to drag Scotland out of the EU against its will. And that's what frustrates me about a lot of British news coverage of Scottish independence then. This perception that it's no more than a nationalist project solely owned by the SNP, that issues like Europe or the climate just don't matter. I mean, speak for yourself, Westminster government, but what the Green Yes campaign is showing is that an independence movement does not have to be based on nationalism. It doesn't have to divide people into them and us. I mean, why would I, as an immigrant, support a nationalist project? For me, Green Yes is a way of rejecting the divisive nationalism that has been driving Brexit, and it's evidence that a case for Scottish independence can be built on openness and inclusivity, and simply the belief that we can do better as an independent nation in the European Union. We have better things to do than spending months, probably even years, sorting out the mess that is Brexit and all the problems it will create. And independence would allow us to focus on what's really important, such as, for example, the climate crisis. So that's why I'm supporting the Green Vision for Independence, because it will create a Scotland that's fairer, that's greener, and that's so welcoming to immigrants like myself, so that we will continue to describe it as our home without even a second thought in the future. Thank you.
Friends, we're really fortunate as the Greens to be part of a genuinely European and international movement. The Scottish Green Party are just one part of the European Greens. And since 2016, our wider European family have been fighting Scotland and Northern Ireland's corner across the continent. Greens in every capital, every parliament across Europe and in the European Parliament have been telling our story, explaining to people across the continent that Brexit is not what Scotland voted for, that we want to continue to be part of the European project. We are so grateful for the solidarity that our European Green colleagues have showed us, from ordinary party members across Europe to members of national parliaments, members of the European Parliament. They've never stopped fighting for Scotland over the last few years. It was the Greens' idea to make sure that Auld Lang Syne was sung in the European Parliament 2 days ago. And even last night, they organised a farewell ceilidh for the departing MEPs, which I think was a bit of a culture shock for quite a few of our colleagues. But we're absolutely delighted today to be joined by the co-leader of our group in the European Parliament, a German MEP who has never stopped standing up for Scotland since Brexit in 2016, but for years before that as well. So please give a really warm Scottish welcome to Ska Keller.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great and fantastic to be here, especially, well, we're still within this really tragic and dramatic week that we've been living through in Brussels. We've been there. Luckily, I'm more one of the type who can hide her emotions very well. Others couldn't, and there have been a lot of tears, a lot of goodbyes in Brussels, because it's, of course, it's a historic tragedy on a continental scale for everyone affected. But when you've been working together with Brits being part of our Greens EFA group, then it also becomes a very personal story. And it's a real tragedy that we're going to lose all the British MEPs that we've had in our group. Of course, there's also great Brits in other groups, but we're very much attached to our own members of the European Parliament, their assistants as well, who are working with them. And we were and are still so proud to have 7 British Green MEPs amongst our midst. Imagine 7, that is the biggest number ever. And it also shows how much of a green force there is in the UK if it wouldn't always been thwarted by this electoral system that does not allow a proper representation. It shows if you have a proper representation, you can have 7 MEPs. And we're very proud of what those 7 and their predecessors have achieved. We're very proud to call them our colleagues and also our friends forever, no matter what will happen. And we will continue to support them in their struggles, because all of them have told us that they're not going to give up, that they're going to continue to fight for the green cause and also for the European cause, be it in local councils, be it in regional green politics, everywhere. And that also gives us a moment of hope, because I think, especially in these extremely dark moments where you think you've lost it all, it's over, especially in those dark moments, we need to see hope. We need to see the light to walk towards. And it is indeed a dark time right now. It's a dark time for the UK. It smashes so many hopes, but also life stories, perspective, life plans, and we've heard of one of them, of so many people. But it's also a big step backwards when it comes to protection of the environment, where the EU has played a very important role, not only in the UK, but also here. And also it's a big step backwards for social rights that have been protected more and more over the last years by the European Union. It's also a dark day for the European Union on the other side. Never before has a member state left our common union. So far, it's always been a story of getting more and more countries together, getting more and more people together, and unifying our common continent. And that has now been put into question. It puts into question of who we really are, and it also reminds us that the European Union is actually a really good idea. And maybe that's also something that as Greens we have to look back, because very often we've been entangled in our daily political fights, criticizing things for not going fast enough, for not really going how we wanted to, and then sometimes forgetting how important it is also to look at the history, to remember for why we have this union, how important it is to all of us, and I think that is a lesson that we have been drawing. So it's indeed very, very dark times, but it's so important in those dark times to have hope, to see hope. And that's why I'm so happy to be here on this 31st of January, to be here amidst so many people and in a party that is presenting exactly that spirit of hope, that spirit of not giving up, and this spirit of saying, today, when it seems maybe like we've lost it all, no, we're not giving up. We're starting a new beginning here. We're starting a campaign to prevent the worst, but also to make things better for this region, for this country, and for the whole of the European Union, for everyone who lives in it. And that's why I'm extremely happy to be here on this particular 31st of January. And because you're working on hope for the future, for hope for those dark times, I'm really also looking forward to see your campaign over the last weeks and months and whatever is to come. And of course, it's up for the people who live in Scotland to decide on their future. It's important that you ask this question, what should our future be? And everyone who lives in Scotland, who has made Scotland a home, to decide about that. I don't live here. I won't decide, obviously, about the future that you want to see for yourself. But if people living in Scotland decide to choose independence, then the Greens in Europe will all that we possibly can to make sure that Scotland can swiftly come back home, come back to the European Union. And when I say the Greens in Europe, that actually is quite a force to be reckoned with. It's not just a few people here and there spread all over the continent. No, the Greens in Europe, we're a really strong force and we're growing by the day. We have Green parties surging in the polls all over, be it in Belgium, Finland, Germany, France, to name just a few. Right now in the European Parliament, we have the biggest group ever. We are in more governments all over the European Union than ever before, and we're still growing. The Green forces are really among the growing and hopeful growing forces in the European Union, and no one can get past us. Also, the Green topics are on top of everybody's agenda. Finally, we will say, right? I mean, the UK Greens were among the first Greens to be founded ever, and we've been raising the issue of climate protection, of environmental protection for decades. But finally, because of all that we have done all together, what you have done all together, they are on top of the agenda. Even the European Commission has started to realize that they have to move forward on the green agenda. Actually, this Commission is, at least by announcement so far, what will come about, we will see in the next month, but it's the greenest ever. They have, for the first time ever, announced a really green work program for this year, but also for the 5 years to come. And that is amazing. Of course, we'll have to see what each initiative contains, and for sure we will criticize as Greens and say, well, this is not enough to deal with the climate crisis. But we do see how much of the popular movement is also behind the fight for climate justice. And that gives me personally also hope, because we know we only have very little time to tackle the climate crisis and also the biodiversity crisis. Let's not forget about that one. There's only little time left, so it's really important that those green issues are all on everyone's top of the agenda and that we get somewhere with that. If we just look at Australia over the past weeks, what the climate crisis can wreak as havoc. But it's not just there, it's maybe the most blatant example right now, but we can see it, we can feel it on an everyday basis. When springs come earlier, we might say, great thing, but it's not good for the environment, it's not good for climate when the biggest glaciers of the Antarctica are melting, and that alone will bring a huge amount of sea level rise. Also, if we look at the biodiversity crisis, which is a huge crisis, seas are emptying out, corals are basically impossible to save still. We're losing out on insect species, on bird species, and any other species all over. We have a huge problem, and that's why we need to tackle it. And it needs Greens to call out for the action and make sure this action is being implemented. We are, as European Greens, well, as Greens all over the world, we are the only credible force in this environmental question. It needs us active on every level, be it local, regional, national, European, worldwide. It needs us stronger than ever in order to tackle those existential crises. And those ecological crises also need to be at the heart of the future of the European Union. We need to think about where we want to head with it. And it's, for us, very clear that the ecological questions need to be at the heart of the future of the European Union, because, well, we only have one planet, and we need to do something about it. But we also have a strong historic depth, being the richer countries who've had a lot of emissions for a long time, and now we need to do our extra share. But we shouldn't forget also the strong link to social issues. It's always the poorer people, be it on a global level as well as on the local scale, who are always most affected by climate crisis, but also by environmental degradation. So let's never forget the link to that. But if also the European Union, if Europe as a whole doesn't do anything about the climate crisis, then who would we expect to do something about it? We're one of the richest continents with one of the biggest historic depths. It needs us to be active now, and also to show that it's possible, that it can be done. Brexit forces us to think about the mistakes that we've done in the past and what new way forward we need to find, both for Scotland but also the European Union. And I think one of the mistakes that the European Union as a whole, if we can say like this, has been done is maybe focusing too much on things like the single market, on trade in the world and so on, and forgetting to involve people more, and forgetting to focus on social rights, on environmental protection, on climate justice, to make sure that also our democracy is defended against lies, against disinformation. We've been just letting it pass through and not taking urgent action on that. I think this is something that we urgently need to learn, and we need that to change. We need a European Union and a Europe that's on the forefront of climate justice and biodiversity protection. And a Europe that is the Europe of people, protecting their social rights and their well-being. And a Europe that protects human rights of everyone, also and especially at the borders, also and especially of those of the most vulnerable people. And a Europe and we also need the European Union and Europe to defend democracy against those blatant lies, against the likes of Orban, who say rule of law, democracy, they don't matter. They do matter. They are the fundament of European values and principles. We need to defend them, and we can't just say, okay, well, this will go away. No, we need to stand up. It needs all the Democrats to stand up against those misinformation, against the attack on democracy. And that will be a big struggle now. The European Union, the Europe that we have right now, is not yet the Europe that we as Greens want, that we're struggling for. But it's the best attempt in this direction. And it's our task and it's our struggle to make it better, greener, more social, more transparent, more democratic, all the more as we want, to make it more of that every single day and step by step. That's what we're trying to achieve in the European Parliament. That's what Greens are trying to achieve everywhere in Europe. And that's why we need you to grow strong, to grow even stronger, to make your voices heard, to always stay strong, and to never, ever give up hope. We need you, and we will leave a light on for you in Brussels and everywhere in Europe. Thank you so much.
This weekend, we are restarting the Green Yes campaign, and we don't mean that just with this rally. 100,000 Green Yes campaign cards will be delivered by our volunteers across the country over the weekend. And if you could join them, that would be fantastic. We will only win this campaign by having conversations with our friends, with our neighbours, by everyone we can in our community, and getting our message of transformation across to them. We were only able to do that, though. We were only able to produce these first 100,000 campaign cards because of the generosity of the first 50 regular donors to the relaunched Green Yes campaign. Because of the support they gave us, we knew that we were in a financial position to do that straight away. If that's something that you can contribute to this campaign as well, that would be an incredibly powerful move to make. There are regular donation forms up on our table at the back alongside our merchandise. If you can give even just a couple of pounds a month, together by our hundreds doing that, we can deliver the kind of powerful campaign that will become a winning campaign. Now, our final speaker today is not someone who really needs an introduction, but I'm giving him one anyway. In 2014, at the end of the campaign, I remember when Nicola Sturgeon was asked who was her most valued player on the Yes side, who really surprised her. She said it was Patrick Harvey. Patrick Harvey was someone who she thought had made a really powerful contribution to the Yes campaign. She doesn't think that after First Minister's questions every week these days, but that's our job as well. Patrick played such a powerful role, not just in the wider Yes campaign, but in bringing our unique green message across to hundreds of thousands, millions of people who hadn't heard it before, and in the process, transformed our party. So the final speaker today is Patrick Harvey MSP, co-leader of the Scottish Green Party.
Thanks very much, Ross. Kind words about last time, and I'm looking forward to next time. And thanks also to Ska in particular for taking the trip to come with us and join us here today. It's really valuable to me and to all of us to hear the voice of the European Greens, but also to say we're still European Greens. The Scottish Green Party... The Scottish Green Party is saddened at what is being done to our country. Not by our country, but to our country at the moment. But we're still remaining part of the European Green Party. We'll still be a voice with our colleagues across the whole of Europe. I am European. I'm a European person. I was born just a few months after the UK entered the institutions of Europe. No, you're right, I don't look that old. Thanks for pointing that out. I was born just after we became part of those institutions. We have always, for far longer than that, been culturally part of Europe. And we will remain that. We will remain European. I'll remain a European person. We all will. We'll remain a European country. But we have work to do to regain our position as part of the European institutions as well. And our party was unleashed on the world at roughly the same time I was. Back in 1973, this country formed the first Green Party. And our path, our place within that European story is significant as well. There are good reasons why Greens have always felt naturally at home within that European story and within that European family. Well, tonight, that is going to change in terms of the institutions. And it's bad enough, it feels hurtful enough that it's being done against my will, against the will of my city, and against the will of my country. But we have to ensure that we're not just sad and angry today, but we are also hopeful and determined for our future, because we can make it better. The achievements that Greens have made as part of Europe, it's a very long list. We can talk about the specific environmental protections. We can talk about Europe as a voice on the global stage. We can talk about regulating some of the worst excesses of free market capitalism. We can acknowledge that sometimes when Europe hasn't gone far enough on that agenda. Sometimes when Europe has done the wrong things, it's been because of harmful and right-wing politics at a domestic member state level, not because of the structures of the EU itself. Successive UK governments have been the ones trying to scupper attempts to crack down on corporate tax avoidance at the European Union level. And that's something that can only be achieved if countries cooperate. There's been UK governments who've tried to water down some of the environmental regulations to protect our wildlife and to protect our population from harmful chemicals. Scotland could be so much more progressive a European voice than the UK ever was. But I think the thing that bothers me most, the thing that angers me most about what is being done is the loss of freedom of movement. Generation after generation, war after war, the young people of the countries of Europe were rounded up by their own governments, marched into fields and ditches and made to slaughter one another, not to make their own communities better, but to serve the interests of the governments who were supposed to be looking after them. And after the Second World War, a long, slow journey began to build a different future for the young people of the countries of Europe. And they can now choose where they want to travel, whether they want to travel, to learn, to work, to love, to study, to make a life. That's an astonishing achievement. It's something I would like to see as part of humanity's future, way beyond the European borders. But to have achieved that European freedom of movement over recent decades, that's one of the most astonishing political achievements of the last few generations. And it tears my heart out to hear we had some kids, I can hear some kids still in the audience running around. I want to know that by the time they're deciding where they want to study, where they want to work, by the time they're making their choices, they have that freedom restored to them. And that's something we need to be determined about. The Brexit campaign had a damn good slogan. The reason why Take Back Control was such an effective slogan was that a great many people feel a lack of control. They feel that they don't have control of their lives or their communities or their local economy. That's the result of a failing in domestic politics. A failing of domestic politics that's been perpetrated by the same people who sold them the Leave campaign. The people who caused the underlying factors that drove that anger, that disillusionment, the same people who did that, they're the ones seeking to take control over all of our lives. The entitled, wealthy, privileged, right-wing politicians who brought us the Leave campaign and who've now taken control of the Tory party and the UK government. There are no more moderates in the Tory party. The Tory party is now wholly owned by its Brexit extremist wing. They're the people who caused the anger in the first place, that justified anger, and Brexit is not a solution to the reasons for that anger. And that's before we consider the lies, the hypocrisy, the law-breaking of the Leave campaign, and the hacking of democracy that we've witnessed. And the polls have shown consistently since then that even a lot of people who voted Leave, particularly younger voters, have seen the political chaos that's resulted and recognised that this is a mistake. And they were never given a say as to whether they like the deal that was on offer. They were never given a say. And that's a failure of political opposition at Westminster just as much as it's a deliberate con by those who've been in government. The people were never given the opportunity to say, are you sure? Is this really what you thought you were voting for? They were never asked again whether they agreed with the terms. So the only people who've taken back control are the people who brought this crisis about in the first place. They have no interest. Boris Johnson and his cronies have no interest in giving real control over our lives to people. And they've shown that in the way that they've treated Scotland. I think they've shown that in the way they've treated everybody. But the treatment of Scotland is particularly stark. It throws a light onto the plan that these people have in mind to impose on all of us. It's not just that strong 62% Remain vote of the way people in Scotland voted when they were asked, do you want to leave the European Union? That vote has been ignored. There's been no attempt to reach out. You know, sometimes a referendum that's really close can still result in progress. You know, the Welsh Assembly referendum, for example, to create devolution in Wales, they run it by a whisker. But they didn't then say, suck it up, you lost, we're going to do what we like. They reached out and they tried to achieve consensus after the fact. And they did it, and as a result of that, devolution worked. It was a success. The UK government did exactly the opposite. They had no interest in reaching out to people in Scotland or anywhere else who voted Remain. The treatment of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish government, regardless of what you think of the party in government, the treatment has been nothing less than disgraceful. Even the Scottish government's Brexit minister has sometimes found that he only finds out what the UK government have in mind from social media, not from actual communication, government to government. We had the farce of the economic impact papers that the UK government tried to keep hidden. And for a week or two, MSPs were offered the chance not to study them at our leisure, not to download them and share them and scrutinise them properly, but to scuttle across to the other side of Edinburgh for a little half-hour slot where we had to surrender our mobile phones in case we might take any images of the graphs and the charts of all the economic harm. Mark Ruskell, my colleague, had to take pencil and tracing paper into the room with him to try and take down some information from that. And I think Ross Greer just told me that when he got his half-hour slot to go and look at those impact papers, every chair that he had to sit on was covered in Union Jack cushions. It's a level of contempt that doesn't even bear thinking about. And then the devolution settlement itself. You know, 20-odd years ago, the people of Scotland voted for a devolution settlement. We voted to create our own parliament. And a fundamental part of what was on offer was that the UK would not interfere with devolved issues without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. Well, they've done that now with the Brexit Continuity Bill, which Greens tried to improve. Greens got stronger level of protection for social and environmental rights into that bill than the equivalent legislation in the UK. So the UK government didn't like it, struck it down, passed its own legislation against the consent of the Scottish Parliament. They've just done so again with the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Again, fundamentally changing Scotland's devolution settlement against the consent of Scotland's Parliament, and certainly against the consent of Scotland's people. And what's going to come next? What's going to come next if we simply allow ourselves to be taken along in this direction? If we don't challenge it, if we don't choose a different path, what's going to come next is the same kind of high-handed, aggressive attitude to trade policy. Not just trade agreements with the extremist who's currently in the White House, the delusional, bullying, climate-denying, racist, misogynist who's currently in the White House. Not just the kind of trade objectives that administration is setting around downgrading our food standards, our health standards, our social rights at work. The kind of trade agreements that they have in mind, the UK government has in mind, with a whole host of countries around the world, will be the absolute polar opposite of what has been achieved with strong democratic scrutiny of trade policy in the European Parliament. You know, Ska and colleagues successfully challenged trade deals like TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the idea of transferring huge amounts of what should be democratically accountable power away from democracy and into the hands of corporate lobbyists and panels of corporate lawyers. That kind of trade agreement is toxic to our social rights and to an environmental vision which even achieves survivability. That's the kind of agenda the UK government has in mind, and they don't have a moment's interest in democratic scrutiny and challenge, either for the Scottish Parliament or even for MPs at Westminster, who will have less say on those trade agreements than MEPs did in the European Parliament when they successfully challenged some of the worst of them. So we need to ensure that Scotland takes that different path. We were not in control of our path out. We've been forced down that path of leaving the European Union, and we need to be in control of our path back in. I'm constantly reminded of an exchange that I had back in 2014 as we were getting ready for that independence referendum. An exchange I had in a TV studio with a political colleague from right at the other end of the political spectrum, Ruth Davison of the Scottish Conservative Party. And I was challenging this notion that the Better Together campaign were trying to sell you. They were trying to tell you that the only threat to our future as part of the European Union was a yes vote. And I'm constantly reminded of how that exchange went. And I think we can just get a little reminder of how that conversation went back in 2014.
But I think it's disingenuous of Patrick to say that no means out and yes means in, when actually the opposite is true. No means we stay in, we are members of the European Union.
Britain is to leave the European Union. The official result of the referendum was announced in the
Ruth,
past
what happened?
hour.
Ruth. Yes means out and no means in, and what is happening now is we've voted no, a majority, on Ruth Davison's advice and the advice of our colleagues, and now we're being taken out. Now, Ruth might even, to be as generous as I possibly could, she might even have believed her own words at the time. But there is no way that that position can be justified any longer. Reality is the polar opposite of what she was trying to sell to voters at the time. No wonder Ruth now can't wait to be out of the Scottish Parliament and get stuck deep into that trough of corporate lobbyist money. She'll be much happier there, I'm sure. But as we've heard today, as I think we all know, and as the First Minister said today as well in her speech this morning, the status quo that people were offered and that the majority voted for back in 2014, that status quo no longer exists. I didn't believe it would at the time, but that's what people voted for. It no longer exists, and we cannot pretend that there is any other option than for Scotland's future to be put back in the hands of the people who live here, with the choice on a ballot paper of whether to become an independent country and take our future into our own hands. Independence. I was so proud of the way Greens took part in that independence campaign. I don't think we ever pretended that independence was a magic solution to every problem, that it would be a land of milk and honey. We recognise, it's a real world choice that we can make, but it will mean that our mistakes are ours to make. The solutions we want to put in place are the solutions we choose. It's not nirvana, it's not something magical or a fantasy. And there will be challenges along the way. But we can, and I believe we are ready to make that choice. And the poll the other day showing the majority of people in Scotland are ready to make that choice is only the beginning. And it's a beginning that we will build on with a strong green vision of what Scotland's future can be. And that green vision is essential. We can't allow the risk that independence is simply presented as a tepid Scottish version of the status quo, a tepid Scottish version of the kind of unsustainable and unjust economy that the UK has already been giving us. It has to be something better, something positive, and something that faces up to the fundamental challenges of the 21st century. A green vision that says Scotland's future can go beyond that fossil fuel age that we must leave behind. It can embrace a sustainable vision where every generation makes our environment stronger and healthier instead of more and more degraded. And where we do that in a way that creates prosperity and social justice for everybody, not just for those who've been benefiting from the failing economy that we have today. I'm going to be very upset tonight when 11 o'clock strikes. I'm going to be upset, but I'm also going to be resolved, determined, and I'm going to be hopeful. Greens sometimes have to be hopeful against the odds, and hope can be hard work in these difficult days. But if it falls to us to try and create that hope, we absolutely have to rise to the challenge. We may not be Remainers anymore after tonight. We have to be rejoiners. And I would love to think that we can bring the rest of the UK with us as well. I'm sure there will come a time when people across the rest of the UK also recognise that their future must be European as well, and that is the most positive, beneficial, socially and environmentally just future they can have. I'm not willing to wait as long as they may want to wait. I think we need to take that step now and demonstrate that leadership. Scotland cannot afford to be held back and wait for the rest of the UK to come to its senses at some future time. We have to make that choice now. And we are ready for that campaign. But I'm sorry, I do have to reinforce one of Ross's points earlier. We're ready for that campaign, but we can't afford that campaign without you either. Greens are only the sum of you. We don't have big donors throwing, 6 and 7 figure donations at us. We don't have big business backing us. We have you backing us. And we need to ask for you, and we need to ask for you to ask your friends. Help us run that campaign. Help us pay for that campaign. If you can, chip in something. A regular donation every month will make our campaign the transformational, positive and energetic campaign that it needs to be, and that I know it can be. We can do this. We can give Scotland the hope that a better future is not just possible, but is right there within our grasp. I believe Scotland will be ready to make that choice. I believe our green vision of the future will be one of the things that makes it a reality. And I want to thank every single one of you for being here, as well as our guests. You want to come back up on stage and give one more thanks to all of our speakers here tonight. Thank you for being with us. And let's get out there and sell a positive vision for Scotland's future as an independent member of the European family. Thank you.
Rewind to when we didn't know each other's eyes. Now I replay the moment you pretend